Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the very first customer event that we're doing. Hopefully you can all see my screen. This is the first time we've ever run this before, so we're hoping it goes off without a hitch. Please excuse any glitches. We're super excited to present this stuff today. We have a bunch of people from the team in the chat. If you have questions along the way, feel free to drop questions in there. People can answer it. We want this to be a dialogue. It's also our first time using the Zoom webinar feature, so this is exciting. Cool, so what are we talking about today? So here's a quick agenda. So getting started, what I want to kick off with is really talk about the context for WorkOS as a company and a product. So I call this crossing the enterprise chasm. I'm going to give some background about that. Get started there. Then I'm going to describe some stuff around what WorkOS actually is, what the product is, what it does, give a quick overview around that. Also talk about some new features that we have today and give some demos of some integrations. You're actually going to see some code, see how fast and actually how easy it is to integrate WorkOS. And then we're going to close today with a fireside chat with Brianne Kimmel. Brianne is the founder of WorkLife Ventures, which is a seed stage VC fund that focuses on workplace tools, remote work tools, future of work, a bunch of different stuff. Super, super excited to have her. We're actually also soliciting questions from you all. We want to hear what you think. So please drop those either in the chat or there's a link posted on our Twitter where you can actually go and vote up certain questions. So we'd love to hear what you think we should talk about. That'll be at the end. We'll close out that way. Okay, well, let's dive in and get started. Let's do it. So first, a story. So I want you to imagine, take a step back and imagine that you are a founder building an app. And what you've built is some kind of tool for work, right? So say that you've built an app that's like a wiki tool, a knowledge-based tool for teams. And you launch this tool and your users love it. And adoption spreads probably through word of mouth, viral growth. People can download it maybe to get started for free, share it amongst teams, have it spread. A lot of tools have been adopted this way. So it spreads through word of mouth. People eventually start paying for it. You know, you introduce an individual plan. So you get some individuals to start paying for it, and then some small teams start paying for it. So now you actually have what's the beginnings of a business here. And then you're eager to grow your revenue. So naturally you go reach out to users at the bigger companies to try to sell essentially a bigger contract to them. If this sounds like a story you've heard before, it's because this is the exact thing that companies like Dropbox and Asana and Slack and Airtable and so many countless others have done. This is really the freemium bottom-up go-to-market strategy for tools today. So say you're a developer and you do this. So you go talk to that big enterprise company, and what they come back to you is they say, hey, your app is great, we're ready to buy it. Here's our standard vendor app requirements. This is what we need, and then we're ready to sign. And they'll send you a doc or send you some bullet points, and this is the response by most startups. You look at this and you're like, holy cow, what are these things? You probably haven't built them at all. Feels like it comes out of left field. So what's actually happening here? Why is there this breakdown when you actually try to go sell to bigger customers? So I call this the enterprise chasm. And really what this means is that previously your end user was the buyer. So your actual person using the product was the one buying it. And that's not the case anymore. That's the biggest shift that's happened to your business. And now enterprise IT and the CIO, Chief Information Officer and executive, is now a gatekeeper for you actually selling these deals. So you have a different audience entirely that you need to satisfy. So no longer it's just the end user. And these IT managers and CIOs have a completely different set of features. So different needs, different features that they require. And honestly, they don't care about your product features. They will actually go and buy an inferior product from an end user perspective if it checks their boxes. I've seen this happen with tools, for example, in spaces around like finance, where there's lots of compliance needs. They actually buy a tool that the end users kind of hate, but because it has compliance features. So these end up being restrictions to your growth in your business, and it's a totally different persona that you need to talk to. So what do they actually require? What will they ask you for? So here's just a quick, a quick sampler of some of the things that you might hear from these enterprise customers, from these IT admins. The first is that they'll want custom user authentication and management. So actually managing a large number of users inside of a SaaS product is pretty complex. So they'll want to integrate single sign-on, something like SAML authentication. We'll talk about that in a bit, but you've probably heard about this before. They'll also want some way to automatically provision and deprovision users. If you think about an organization with, say, thousands of employees, they're not going to manually want to add and remove people. So they'll want to connect it to a directory and provision and deprovision users automatically. They'll also want to actually connect this with other services that they use and deeply integrate it. So services like Okta, Workday is another example of an HR system that's really popular, something like Active Directory. There's a really, really long list of services that enterprise organizations adopt, and they'll want to connect your app to those. And they'll also need some kind of UI for configuring and doing this stuff. So some actual, UI to manage this stuff. This is really just a super short version. There's a lot more that enterprise customers require, including audit logs, access control policy for authorization. They'll require compliance. So a really, really long list of stuff. I actually gave a talk about this last year at an event called SaaS School. Check that out, but this is a topic for another talk, the long list of features. But these are a few, just a quick overview. So the challenge here is that actually building for the enterprise is really, really complex and it's boring. And I use the word complex here instead of hard because I wouldn't say it's like capital H hard, challenge. It's just really complex. There's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of code you have to write. And it's not exactly the most exciting code to write for engineers. You have to integrate with legacy protocols. There's a lot of buggy edge cases you have to handle. And I mentioned those integrations with third-party systems. There's really a sprawling set of different IT services that people will use. So you just end up having to build a ton of integrations and do a ton of code here. For most companies also, if you haven't done this before, these enterprise IT features are unknown unknowns, to quote Rumsfeld. And that requires deep customer research to actually understand what you need to build. So you might not even know where to get started. You might not even know how deep the rabbit hole goes. Also, as you develop these, you're essentially constantly building these one-offs for your biggest deals and kind of just scraping it together as you go. And that leads to this compounding maintenance burden. So you have to not only build this stuff, but support it going forward and do more and more as your system grows. And this creates like quite a large burden on engineering teams to keep improving this. And you can't just have an intern or a junior engineer do this. Like there's a huge technical risk if you do this poorly. You're touching your authentication system, your access control system. And this is for your largest customers. So you really can't screw it up. So it's a huge technical risk doing it poorly. And this is a really hard dichotomy, a hard place to be, right? Because you have this incredibly complex thing you have to build that engineers don't really get excited about doing. That's kind of boring, but if you don't do it right, you're hosed. So this is a big challenge. It's one of the reasons why companies fail at this. The other thing that makes this hard is you have to maintain a split focus. So, if you focus only on product features, only on end user features, you'll miss these enterprise customers. You'll lose your enterprise pipeline. You'll churn your biggest customers. They'll leave and go to a competitor, probably forever. A great example of this is Dropbox versus Box. Today, Dropbox totally has enterprise features and is great, but if you think back maybe 5 to 10 years ago, Dropbox didn't have these things and people went to Box for the enterprise version of file sharing. So if you don't, if you only focus on product features, you'll lose this revenue. And likewise, if you only focus on enterprise and stop developing product features, that can have a negative effect too, because you'll stop innovating your product, your users will become unhappy, you can even get lapped by a new startup. Slack is in this position. Slack as a product is great, their business is doing super well, but they really have stopped building end user product features and things for the actual end users using the product. And that's why you see companies like Discord able to eat some of that market share and come in quickly, because Slack is really exclusively focused on the enterprise functionality. So you have to maintain this split focus in between the two sides, and this is really challenging, especially from a leadership perspective and a product management perspective. So the result of this is that the enterprise chasm kills products, and it can kill startups as well. You might be in this chasm if your revenue is primarily self-serve. Maybe you have some of these like overgrown self-serve orgs. If your enterprise customers came through just kind of organic signups and then ballooned, maybe they're not quite true enterprise users. Usually you're in like the low single-digit millions in revenue. And kind of jumping into the SaaS economic side here, your average contract value, your ACV, usually here is too low to actually have a proper sales team. Your economics just don't work out for it, and so you can't have an efficient sales team. You're really stuck in this kind of hard place. Oftentimes, your revenue is also really lagging behind product maturity in terms of company stage. I've seen this put a board of directors put a tremendous amount of pressure on CEOs to increase revenue in this stage. This is when you see people raising these kind of insane multiples on revenue, and they really need to quickly try to find ways to capture revenue because they might have a lot of users, but not necessarily the revenue to back it up. And switching to this enterprise focus also can really hurt morale. So you end up having like a high team turnover, you grind for years, you lose momentum. And I kind of call this like zombie mode, where these companies will be in this mode for like 3 to 5 years, where they're just kind of grinding along, slowly growing revenue, but largely losing momentum. And a really common outcome here is that you either raise a bunch of money and then have some kind of acqui-hire where there's actually no upside for founders or early employees because there's such high preference stack. So this is a really kind of terrible place to be as a company. And I actually think that this is the leading cause of flat rounds or down rounds, financing wise, for B2B SaaS companies, and like a dramatic amount of increased dilution for founders and early employees. Being stuck in this chasm really just hurts the business physics of building products, and it's really a distribution problem. Other industries don't necessarily have this other focus, but it happens all the time in B2B SaaS companies. So this sucks. And you might be thinking, well, maybe I just won't do this stuff. I won't deal with this. I'll only do, the small companies, or just focus on those smaller organizations. And the problem there is that these features are now required by SMBs. So calling them enterprise features is kind of a misnomer. The unbundling of workplace tools, people bringing their own applications, individuals bringing their own apps into the workplace, has created more products that people use. This explosion of new apps is something that IT needs to manage. And what's happening here is these enterprise features, these things that used to be required in really large orgs, are actually getting pushed downstream into smaller companies. And so it's not uncommon to see something like single sign-on required when closing like a 50-seat deal, which is super unusual. Right? This single sign-on used to be only required for hundreds of users or thousands. Now it's sub-100 people teams. So you can't really avoid this stuff. Enterprise features are effectively now a day one requirement for cloud SaaS apps. So the enterprise chasm is wider and wider. So this is why we built WorkOS. This is what we're trying to solve, this structural problem that I just described. What WorkOS helps you do is cross the enterprise chasm and unlock the enterprise market. So, sounds pretty great. How do we do this? Well, we make your app enterprise ready. So we provide these pre-built enterprise features and functionality, and that includes the UI. And the reason we can do this is the features and functionality that the IT admins require is actually the same no matter what product you're building. So it's the same feature if you're building that wiki tool as if you're building a chat tool, as if you're building a design tool. Doesn't matter, they're going to require the same features. So what we've done is pre-built those, and we give those to you, including the UI, essentially done and ready to go for you to integrate. WorkOS is created for developers by developers. So we have really clean APIs, modern SDKs, real-time webhooks. It's created as like a modern developer platform. And we have seamless integration across all these different fragmented systems used within enterprise IT. So we plug into all these different things so you don't have to build those integrations as one-offs. For us, there are no one-offs. There are no edge cases. They're just the features that we actually provide, the systems that we integrate with. So we've done all of that long tail hard work for you. And this is effectively product layer infrastructure for your application. So we're not running your servers for you. We're not deploying your code for you. We're providing product layer infrastructure. And some people kind of have called us Stripe for enterprise features. So if you've used Stripe and you know how Stripe can provide UI features and handle your payment stack, you can think about WorkOS as kind of the enterprise version, enterprise features version of that. So we help make your product enterprise ready. Okay, so let's talk about some specific stuff that we actually do. So today what we're going to do is go through 4 different features in WorkOS. Some of these are brand new, so super excited to show them to you. We're also going to show some live demos of this working, so fingers crossed, pray to the demo gods, everything will work. There's a lot more stuff inside of WorkOS than just this, but these are the ones we thought we'd highlight today that we thought would be the most useful to talk about. Okay, let's jump in. So first, single sign-on. So I mentioned this before, so SSO. You've probably heard about SSO before. You might not know exactly what it is, but this is by far the first thing that enterprise customers will ask you for. And I mentioned that SMBs requiring this. This is actually what they'll ask for too. So let's talk about SSO. So what is SSO? So SSO enables end users to sign in to your application with a single password and identity broker, instead of every app having its own password and its own system. So you can think about this as like a shared identity across all different systems. If you've used like Google Sign-In is effectively a form of single sign-on, but there's many different identity systems that are out there. So single sign-on, you'll need to plug into the identity system used by this end enterprise company. This is really a deal breaker for enterprise customers. It's the first thing they'll require, and if you don't have this, literally you can't sell to them. I've seen huge deals just blocked by this one feature. It's also now required by many SMBs, and the reason why is these smaller companies having requirements around security, compliance, or just end user usability. You don't want to have to maintain passwords across many different services. Plug into one SSO solution. Some common protocols that you might have seen are things like SAML or OpenID. ADFS is one by Microsoft. So there's a bunch of different protocols actually doing the authentication. And you've probably seen this before. If you use Slack, this is really common that you can connect to Slack. So usually with Slack, you can sign in with an email and password. You can sign in with Google. Here, Slack is configured to sign in with Okta. So Okta is one of the identity systems that an enterprise company might use. The problem here is that this is really fragmented. So there's a ton of different identity systems and protocols. So you can't just build it once. It requires literally years of ongoing development to get right. Stack Overflow just actually published a blog post. We'll post these slides later so you can grab the link. But at Stack Overflow, it took 3 engineers 3 months just to build Okta, just Okta, which is one of the identity systems that you might integrate with. So this is a tremendous amount of engineering work to do this. And what this results in is brittle integrations and really frustrated enterprise admins. You'll be building this in step with trying to deploy to them. It'll break, and it'll break with your biggest potential deals in your, the direction you want to take your business. And that's really a bad look. So there's a bunch of different authentication systems and identity systems that are here. There's literally hundreds of identity systems out there. I feel like I discover a new one every month. So this is really challenging. Okay, so how do we solve this? So, our solution, we looked at this and we said, hey, what if you took your application and instead of you building with all the different identity systems and you as a developer having to connect to all these things, we just run this as middleware for you. And so what your application does is connects to WorkOS. In WorkOS, the way that you connect to us is with a really simple protocol that's easy to connect. And then we actually handle the authentication with all these different identity systems. So you plug it in once and you get everything out of the box. And we keep adding identity systems to this literally every month. There's new ones that we plug into, new ones we make sure it works. It's very similar again to Stripe. With Stripe, you plug it in once and you get Visa, MasterCard, Alipay, all these different payment systems, different countries, they keep adding. We're the same thing, but for identity systems. So let's go back to that example for your application. And we're going to use an example here as we go through the talk to illustrate how easy it is to actually integrate WorkOS with a product. So imagine you're building this app. Remember, this is like a wiki tool. we're going to call this Memex. So imagine this as being a wiki tool that you've built, knowledge sharing tool. We've actually built this as a demo app that we'll show. It looks like this. It's just kind of a simple document editor. So we'll go through Memex. So as a first example here, let's add single sign-on to Memex. So actually, let's see what it's like to integrate WorkOS SSO. And for that, I will hand this over to Taylor, who's a developer success engineer on our team, to walk us through it.
All right, thank you so much, Michael. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Taylor. I'm a developer success engineer here at WorkOS. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to have a brief overview covering what it takes to integrate WorkOS single sign-on into an application like Memex. And then we're going to walk through actually integrating single sign-on into Memex and authenticating our first Okta user. So to start, integrating SSO into an application like Memex is extremely easy. The developer experience is pleasant and it's fast. We see developers move from their first dashboard login to authenticating their first user from an IDP like Okta in less than 1 hour. It's exceptional and it's wonderful, and it's because ultimately this integration is OAuth. If you're familiar with OAuth and you know OAuth, then you understand and you know WorkOS. So what does that mean? Ultimately, this integration follows a 3-step process. The first step is going to be adding the authentication route to our application. And this is going to be the location of the identity provider that your user is directed to for authentication. Number 2, we're going to add a callback route. And this is going to be a location within this case, within Memex, that our user is redirected to after they've successfully authenticated, in this case with Okta. And then third and final step is we're going to create our user's session. In this case, it's going to entail exchanging a code for an authentication token and a user profile. And then we're going to set up our user session information with the information contained within that profile. And as we're sort of pausing and noting here that we offer a variety of framework agnostic and native SDKs, such as languages like Python, Rails, Go, Node, PHP. Pardon me, I said Rails. We have it's framework agnostic, so we're actually covering Ruby. Rails is included in that. PHP, Laravel, and we're constantly expanding those native offerings as well. Soon we're going to be supporting languages like Elixir, Clojure, .NET, and Java. So no matter what you're building in or how you're building, we're going to have you covered. And so with that, let's take a closer look at each of these 3 steps required for integration. So step 1 here is to add our authentication route. And essentially what we're doing here is constructing a class that's going to set up this authorize endpoint. And we're going to have this endpoint redirect to an authorization URL that we are generating using this convenience method from the WorkOS SDK called authorization URL, uncannily enough. And in this case, this method is going to require 3 parameters. The first being the domain for this user, which we're going to grab from their the authenticating user's email address. 2, this requires a project ID, which is going to be found in your WorkOS dashboard. And this is going to act as the OAuth client ID and as a public identifier for our application. And third, this requires a redirect URI, which is going to be a location that the user is sent to after authenticating. And in our case, this will be our callback route, which we're going to set up in step 2. And so similar to our authorization route, we're going to go ahead and construct this class for our callback endpoint. And we're going to begin by setting up our profile using another convenience method from the WorkOS Ruby SDK, in this case, aptly named profile. And in that case, we're going to grab the code from the URL parameters that we have received and exchange that code for our authorization token and our user profile, which we're actually going to use in step 3. So for step 3, we're going to create our user session. And we're going to do this by retrieving the profile info from the user, from the profile object that we retrieved in step 2, and set that up, sign our user in, and then redirect them back to our application. And so with that overview, we can see it's quick. This is fast and a lightweight, pleasant experience. So let's go ahead and walk through integrating single sign-on, specifically with Okta SAML, into Memex. All right, so in this case, I'm going to share my screen. All right, so here you can see we're going to go ahead and hit our login form for Memex, and we can see normal behavior. So I can come here, I can sign in with normal username and password, and I'm back to my Memex homepage. But we don't want username and password, right? We want Okta. We want single sign-on with Okta. So let's go ahead and head out of here and move on over to our dashboard in WorkOS. And once we land here, we are going to head on over to get started with single sign-on. And here we're actually directed to essentially what is an easy single sign-on setup wizard. So we have very clear, quick, easy steps to begin setting up single sign-on and to get your users integrated immediately. For our first step here, you can see all of our natively supported SDKs. And if we click through here, you can see that we actually dynamically provide and update code samples based on whatever language you are building with. In our case, Memex is built using Ruby. So we're going to go ahead and move forward here. And we've actually gone ahead and we've installed our gem, we've set up our initializer and everything like that. So we're going to go ahead on to step 2 and configure our redirect URIs. In this case, this is going to be our callback endpoint for Memex. Went ahead and pre-populated that field, and we're going to go ahead and check step 2 as complete and add that URI. And this is really where most of the integration is going to take place. As you can see here, we actually provide you with quick and easy copy and pastable code samples for each of these routes. So you just have to drop these into your backend and you can begin authenticating. As a matter of fact, we can peek behind the curtain here. And this is actually the SSO controller that's live and deployed for Memex. So you can see we've checked all of our boxes, we've moved through each of these steps, and we have each of our routes set up and ready to go. So we'll move to our next step, which is to configure our identity provider. And here we actually offer you the ability to move through documentation, to configure an IDP, but we actually go one step further in step 5. So in this case, we don't want to follow this Okta setup guide. What we're actually going to do is move on to step 5 and test single sign-on. So what we're doing in step 5 is really special. What we're doing here is we're actually provisioning an Okta account and an Okta user and an Okta application so that way you're able to test this integration end to end and successfully authenticate a user with Okta without ever leaving the dashboard. And this is especially wonderful because just take it from me, you don't have to get on a call with an Okta sales rep to get their spiel. You don't have to sign an Okta contract for a developer plan. We've handled all that. We've gone through the legwork. All you have to do is sign in. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and find our password. We're going to select our redirect URI, and then we're going to log in with our account. So as you can see, we're immediately redirected to Okta to access Memex. We can come here and enter our Okta username that WorkOS has provisioned, enter our password. And voila, we're right back to Memex having successfully authenticated with Okta. And also to demonstrate that this is live and working for our application as well, I can come back here, use my Memex login form as a service provider, enter my credentials. And voila, because I've already authenticated in that first instance, I would just bounce to Okta, my session was stored, and then I was redirected right back to Memex. And that's it, it's that easy. If you notice, there's no interstitial login screens, there's no branded components, no visible redirect URLs. This is UX for authentication is completely controlled by the developer. And this is a fully white labeled experience that's completely seamless from any authenticating user's perspective. And I just want to emphasize as well that this is the same regardless of IDP. So whether you're authenticating with Okta, Azure AD, Ping One, Ping Federate, G Suite, OneLogin, the list goes on, this is going to be seamless across the board. And that's it. That's all it takes. Less than 21 lines of code, and we are able to authenticate users using Okta SAML using WorkOS. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And with that, I look forward to speaking with you all, and I'll turn it back over to Michael.
All right, thanks a lot, Taylor. So that is WorkOS SSO. So we've actually spent a lot of time working on this to make it that simple. There's an incredible amount of complexity under the hood. But what WorkOS SSO effectively does is makes it extraordinarily easy to add this to your app. I think the current time record of somebody integrating is like 43 minutes end to end, and then they were able to authenticate SAML users. So this is just OAuth to your app. It's compatible with all different identity systems out there, and literally saves months of engineering time. And we really hope that this is the first feature that can unlock just a handful of enterprise deals for really any company. It's also a security feature. It also increases retention and engagement and all this stuff. So we definitely encourage you to check out our docs and start integrating. Cool, so that's SSO. So what's next? So the second thing I'm going to talk about is something that we call the admin portal. So what is this? So the problem here that we're solving is actually that SSO setup is really complex. So what Taylor just showed you around integrating WorkOS SSO to actually connect it to your application through OAuth is really, really easy. That's one integration you do and then you're done. But the identity systems need to be configured to connect to your product. And that means the actual Okta configuration, the actual Microsoft ADFS configuration, SAML configuration. And the problem here is that the actual way that they get set up is also fragmented and complex. Today, how people do this is they have X509 certificates being emailed back and forth. There might be encoding issues. There's these like metadata files that are not standard that get shared with the IDP URLs in it. XML canonicalization is really a dark, deep hole of technical complexity. There's been a lot of huge security issues by people implementing this poorly with SAML assertions, including some companies being hacked in the past. And actually, in addition to doing all this, you have to validate the return to SAML attributes. SAML is such an open spec, there's not as many requirements. So there's a lot of ways the actual setup can go wrong. Once you get it working, it's usually okay, but this is really complex. And it's even more complex with Microsoft ADFS and OpenID Connect and these other protocols. So this results in this really painful experience, honestly, with your customers. You'll sign a big deal and then you'll just have this like headache of trying to integrate and going back and forth with sales engineers, your support reps, or your integration specialists. You have to hire a team to do this. And this is just a huge pain. And it doesn't need to be this way. So we decided to solve this too. So our solution here is we actually provide you the UI to set up SSO. For the end user, the enterprise admin to set up SSO. This is really, really fast and simple to integrate with your app. Again, it's just a few lines of code. We'll show that in a demo in a few minutes. And what we include here is inline documentation for the enterprise IT admin to actually know how to set stuff up. And this includes for generic SAML. So this is actually how the enterprise IT admin is going to configure that Okta app and actually integrate it. We show them using screenshots. We handle all the edge cases, error states. We constantly are testing this. We have a lot of test accounts with many different environments. And really what we've built here is like a fail-proof flow for the IT department. So you don't have to have that, product specialist or sales engineer or somebody manually doing this. You just drop this in, you drop in the admin console and it's done. So here's really quickly what it looks like. So this is actually a full screen experience. You take over the UI and the IT admin will go through this and set up their identity system. And it's kind of like a wizard that they move through every step, right? We can customize this to your branding. We can white label it. This is just the default one, so we're picking Okta here. And then when the ITM actually goes through, when the IT admin goes through here and clicks next, this is what I meant by the documentation. So we actually have updated screenshots of the Okta interface inside of this. So you don't have to be an Okta wizard or an Okta genius to figure out how to do this. You just walk through this. It's like a tutorial, and we have these nice kind of setup steps, for actually moving through this. I kind of thought about this as like, like TurboTax, when you go through step by step and fill out your taxes. It's kind of like that. It takes this really, really complex, really, really fragmented, multiple paths you could take scenario, and distills it down into an easy to follow flow. So this is the admin portal. And we're going to show you how to actually integrate this with Memex. So actually how to use it. And for this, I'm going to hand it over to Max, who's an engineer on our team, to walk us through it. Max?
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. So I'm going to first walk through the code to integrate, and then I'm going to show you all a demo of the admin portal. Let's get started. So there's 3 small steps to get started with the admin portal. First, you have to create a session. So this session defines your organization, and it defines the scopes. So this means what domains, which connections or directories that the session has access to. And you create this using your secret API key on your backend. And with this session, you then just redirect the user to this URL that you have just created. So you can imagine that this is behind a setup SSO button in your settings page, and it goes to your backend. It authenticates that the user is who they need to be. Then it creates this admin portal session with our SDK, and then you redirect to this URL. So at this point, the enterprise admin, they're looking at this admin portal, and they're going to be configuring SSO or directory sync. And in order to notify your application that their configuration was successful, we have a webhook API. So with a webhook API callback, you can be notified when a connection is a configuration for SSO, has been created or updated. And with this information, you can update UI or change the authentication so that the entire organization can use WorkOS's SSO instead of username and password or whatever authentication method you had prior. So let's jump into the code, show y'all an example. So this is a little walkthrough of how to create that portal session. So you can see here that we are using the WorkOS SDK, and we pass in an intent parameter. So the admin portal has many different intents. And for our example, we're going to be configuring SSO. So we're just going to provide SSO as an intent here. Next, you're passing in a reference to the organization that you want the session to be used for. And we're just grabbing this off the current user. And then finally, we're providing a return URL. And this is where the enterprise admin will end up after their session ends. Yeah. And then the next step, all we do is just redirect to the session URL. So that's a simple one-liner in Ruby, as you all may know. And then finally, we are configuring our webhook controller here. So we receive a connection and we check if the status is linked. Linked means that it's ready to go. It's been tested already. So if this is the case, we just take the organization out of our database and we update the provider with the connection, with the provider that the connection was configured with. So if the user has set up SSO with Okta, they'll get a notification here at this webhook endpoint, and then we update our database so we can show a different UI later. And with that, let's give a little demo. Awesome. So here I am at our Memex application. And if I go to our settings page, you can see that we have a setup with SSO button right here. So when I click this, it's going to redirect to that authentication endpoint. It's going to create a session, and then it's going to redirect us to the session. And we end up at the admin portal. So we have a list of integrations here. We're going to choose Okta for this demonstration. And you can see, as Michael was talking earlier, you're presented with a pretty great documentation experience. And remember that this is for your enterprise, your customer. So this is all information that y'all don't have to understand. You don't have to create test accounts with Okta or write documentation yourself on how to integrate with all these integrations. We've done that for you, and this really creates a much better experience for your customers and for your sales team and your development team. So we're going to be creating this Okta application. So reading this documentation, it looks like I'm going to have to copy this single sign-on URL and create an app inside of Okta. So let's go do that. So I'm an Okta admin right now. We're going to go through those steps. We'll call this Memex and continue. So here's that single sign-on URL. We're going to put it right there as well. Let's continue here. All right, so we're going to be configuring some attribute statements. So I'm going to take a good look at these. And if they were more complicated, I could just copy them over, but I can fill these out on my own. You guys can imagine I've done this a lot. So there we go. Perfect. And we select continue. All right, so now we have to get those setup instructions. So I'm going to go through this little vendor thing. And before we jump over to that, I'm going to assign my current user. So it's just the demo account. That's who I'm logged in right now. If we didn't do the assignment, then I wouldn't be able to log into this application. So we'll go back over here and we'll click view those setup instructions. And it looks like we just have to provide some inputs here. So copy these over. Got a certificate to upload. Just drag that onto there. Awesome. So right now, our API is now determining whether this configuration was successful. We're sending a test request to Okta with a SAML request for the really deep inside of what we're doing. But if something didn't really work out, we would have shown an error state with additional documentation on how to fix it. In addition, we also just sent a webhook request to Memex, notifying it that the configuration was successful and that we chose Okta as a provider. So inside of the admin portal, I'm able to now to test the single sign-on. So this will log me in with Okta and then take me back to Memex. So let's go do that. So I already have an active session with Okta, so I'm not being prompted. And we're being redirected right now to get Memex. It's on a hobby dyno right now, so it could be taking some time. There we go. So I was just logged in with Okta and taken back to Memex as an authenticated Okta user. And if I go back to my settings page, you can see here that we're now connected with Okta because that webhook notification let our application know that this organization has now configured SSO with Okta. So that is the admin portal. Thank you. Back to you, Michael.
Awesome, thanks, Max. So that's the WorkOS admin portal. There's a ton of stuff inside of it that we didn't show also around many different providers, but you get the idea where there's the same type of screenshots and the same UI, whether you're setting up Okta, Microsoft ADFS, Ping Identity, OneLogin, any of these systems, we've built it end to end. So this handles the complex UI flow for configuring any type of SSO connections. This also has a level of enhanced security for your application where you never have to store these certificates and auth tokens. The admin portal is communicating directly between your enterprise admin, your customer, between them and WorkOS. So you never have to build this UI and handle that type of sensitive data. And the last thing is there's best of class documentation in here. So anytime one of these systems updates their UI, updates their docs, we update the admin portal. So you can think about that almost as a product that we're providing to you. And this saves, hard to say, months of time. We've been working on this for quite a while. So we're really, really, really excited to roll this out for you all. Cool. That's the admin portal. So 2 more things to talk about today. So the first 2 things we talked about were really authentication, SSO, and setting up users. The third thing I want to talk about is something we call directory sync. So what is directory sync? Why would you actually need this? So what directory sync lets you do is provision an entire organization at once. So it lets your application plug into the directory of an enterprise company. Benefits of this allows you to account for all the users on day 1. So you kind of know everybody inside the organization immediately. And this is contrasted to something that's often referred to as just-in-time provisioning, where you provision users as they sign in. So if you connect to the directory, you can provision all the users at once immediately. And this is cool because it also lets you create shadow accounts for people who haven't signed in. So you can tag people or mention people who actually might not be using the app yet. There's no invite flow. You know about all the users in the organization. You can also charge for all of those users, which is a huge benefit on the revenue and business side, versus waiting for the invites to actually push up that deal size. Second, you can create new accounts immediately when an employee is hired. So you don't have to wait for them to be onboarded and somebody to invite them to the tool. Literally, as soon as their account is created, as soon as they get created in whatever directory, whether it's Google or Workday or Okta or Gusto, it doesn't matter. As soon as they're hired, you can send that activation email, you can get them onboarded, you can get them started right away. And then also you can deactivate users immediately. So this is a huge security feature. So as soon as somebody is removed from the org, whether they leave the company for whatever reason, you can revoke access, revoke sessions. And this is oftentimes why directory sync is mostly required by enterprise admins, is turning off access. If you plug into SSO just by itself, the user won't be able to sign in again because they'll be removed from the SSO system, but you might have an active session. Your app still might have session cookies available. And with most applications, you don't log people out quickly. That stays alive for days or weeks, or maybe it never expires. And so with WorkOS directory sync, you can receive an update that the user should be removed and actually revoke access. And this does it totally automatically. The IT admin doesn't need to log in to actually do this. So this is really, really, really powerful. The problem, similar to SSO, is there's a huge fragmented landscape of directories. And gotta be real with you, it's worse than SSO and identity. There are really no standard protocols. SCIM, SCIM is the closest we have to a standard here, but it's relatively recent and it's kind of already fragmented. The rest of these folks kind of implement their own protocols. The Workday API is totally different than Rippling's API. It's totally different than Active Directory, totally different than Bamboo. And there's even more HR systems and custom things out there, whether it's something built by SAP years ago or an in-house solution or an ERP. It's really, really, really fragmented. And so what we've done is something similar to WorkOS SSO, where we've built a single unified directory API. So same architecture, we connect to the directory systems as WorkOS, and then we're able to broker that data to your application. We standardize it, we normalize these fragmented attributes into a single user object, and then we give you these really simple REST endpoints for not only retrieving users, but you also get groups out of this. So you get the organization structure. So if you want to tag a group or provision off of a group, say you're building a CRM and you only want the users from the sales team, the sales group to be provisioned, you can do that. You get groups as well. And then you also get webhooks for real-time behavior. Not all of the systems I showed on that previous slide have real-time. In fact, most of them don't. And so we do a bunch of different stuff to pull and compare stuff and create transactional updates to actually send your application changes. Because what you actually want to do is take action on the change when somebody's added, when somebody's removed, when their name changes, when their email changes. So we actually send webhooks based on that. We normalize the changes as well. So this is really simple to understand. And it's really kind of like an iceberg. You know, we expose this really small, clean API at the top, but there's this really massive of code under the hood integrating with all these systems. Cool. So that's directory sync, and to show more about how the integration works, to show a demo of this, we'd love to hand it over to Mark, an engineer on the team, who will be able to walk through the different steps and show us some code. Mark?
Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. I'm Mark, an engineer at WorkOS, and I'll be walking you through how to integrate directory sync. So we can do that in 3 steps. 1, connect a directory source. 2, pull in a list of users and groups. And 3, register a webhook endpoint for updates. So in step 1, we would connect a directory source. For this example, we're using G Suite. And you can see that G Suite presents us with an authorization screen. In step 2, we use the WorkOS SDK to pull in a list of directory users. We then iterate over this list of directory users and create user accounts and send out invites from our app. And in step 3, we create a webhook endpoint. And in this particular snippet, we are looking for the user added event, and we use the data from that webhook to create users and send out invites. So let's jump into a demo and see how it all ties together. So I'm going to walk you through how to connect a G Suite directory. And we'll take a look at provisioning and deprovisioning users. So let's start by logging into Memex. And we'll take a look at our users list by clicking on people in the sidebar here. And you can see that only Michael and I have accounts so far. So let's sync in the rest of the team through directory sync. So we'll head over to the WorkOS dashboard in our second tab here. And we'll set up a new directory sync connection. You can see that we provide a setup URL here. And this is a URL that you would send to the G Suite admin. In this case, I have access, so let's go ahead and copy it. And we'll open it in a new tab. Click Allow. Great, so you can see that it's set up. And we'll go back to the WorkOS dashboard. And you can see here that all the users from G Suite were synced. So we'll pop back to Memex, click refresh. And you can see that Memex has received webhooks from WorkOS to provision all the users. And we can take a look at one of our notes here. And I can tag users even before they've signed in. So next up, let's take a look at deprovisioning. So we'll head over to this tab, which has the Google Admin Console. And we'll go ahead and delete my user here. We'll go back to Memex, click refresh. And you can see here that my session has been revoked. So what's happening under the hood is that Memex received a webhook from WorkOS to deprovision the user. And this is a huge feature for compliance. And that's directory sync on WorkOS. Back to you, Michael.
All right, thanks, Mark. So that's a walkthrough of how directory sync works. So it allows you to provision an entire organization at once, bring all of the users in on day one. You can automatically create new accounts for users when they sign up. So when somebody is added to the org, you can send that invite email. You can @mention and @tag people before they've actually started using the app, which is really powerful. And also you can deactivate users in real time when they're removed. And this is probably why IT admins will be asking for directory sync. If somebody asks you for a SCIM integration, SCIM, this is exactly what they're asking for. This is what they're talking about. And WorkOS handles all that for you, works with all the different directory systems that are out there, not just SCIM, not just G Suite, which we showed in that demo, but also Workday, Bamboo HR, so on and so forth. Tons of different systems. Okay, last feature. So last but not least, this is something brand new that we're really excited to show you. And really building this has come through talking to developers like you. So actually learning about how you've been building your applications, talking to end users, seeing what the frustrating components are around this. So we're really excited to show this off. This is brand new. And this is called Magic Link. So what is Magic Link? So what is the context for this feature? Well, passwords suck is really the short version. Passwords become unwieldy and difficult to remember in organizations. If you think about building a sign-in system, you create all this friction for your users around trying to remember a password or what system they've used to sign in. Did I use Twitter? Did I use Facebook? What did I sign in with? And so with Magic Link, we've built the easiest way to authenticate, the easiest way for users to sign into your app ever. And these are even, for users that aren't within an enterprise yet, maybe they're just at whatever company, this is the best way to get started. And our solution here is just to email the user a link, like a one-time use link that they click and they're signed into your app. That's it. They put in their email, they click the link, they're done. And this is something you've probably seen before. There's actually a few products that have implemented this before. Slack does this. So on mobile, and I think also on desktop, but on mobile specifically here, when you're signing into Slack, you're given the option to either type in your password, say you have a really long password or something, you need to go get it from your password manager, or you can just use Magic Link. And Slack will send you a link to sign in. You click that in your email, boom, you're signed into the app. No passwords. Notion actually did this as well. So this is a screenshot from 2018, but Notion actually had something where there's a code to log in, and actually if you click that line underneath login, that'll log you in to Notion. And this, I believe, was Notion's primary way to do auth for a long time. They didn't have passwords. Medium actually also did this too. So to sign into your Medium account, you didn't have to remember what your password was or remember did you sign in with Twitter or what? You just send you a link, you click that, you're signed in. Easy as that. So this is really a super, super low friction, super effortless way for users to sign in. We're incredibly excited about being able to give this to developers, see what you guys will do with it. And to show a demo, I'd like to hand it off to Rohan to talk through the integration, look at some code, and see how Magic Link is actually implemented in practice. Rohan?
Thanks, Michael. So here we're going to spend a few minutes and talk about the steps that are necessary to integrate Magic Link into Memex. So as Michael mentioned, and as we've seen earlier in this talk, authentication is really critical to your application, whether it's from a security perspective or as a tool to unlock more enterprise deals. And over years, authentication becomes more complex, and as security requirements become more complex, it's just as difficult to remember what passwords you're using. So let's go over the steps it takes to integrate Magic Link with WorkOS. So it comes 3 really simple steps. The first thing is, a user is going to arrive at your application. You want to create a passwordless session for this user. And all this is going to do is it's going to represent a one-time, unique, short-lived token that can be confirmed to authenticate your user. After you've generated this passwordless session, the next step is to take the confirmation URL and then send this over to the user. And then after the user opens their email, clicks on the link to confirm it, they'll be redirected back to your application where you as a developer kind of follow a similar OAuth flow, take an authorization code, and exchange it for a profile. And then your user is logged in. So let's dive into these steps a little bit deeper and see what it looks like from a coding perspective. So the first thing you're going to do is create the passwordless session. You have a login form, the user is going to input their email, and you're going to create this passwordless session. So for here, we'll use my email, rohan@workos.com, and we'll indicate that this session is a Magic Link. The response you'll get for this session object is going to have some metadata in it. It'll have some sort of standard identifier, but more importantly, you'll get the expiration time for this session, the actual direct link to confirm this session, and the user who it's for. The next step is to email the Magic Link over to the user. And in this step, you have 2 options. Let's say you're starting out development, or maybe you haven't built out a mailer client yet, or you just want to test something out really quickly. WorkOS offers a really easy one-line way to send the Magic Link for you. If you just grab the identifier from the previous session response and pass that through, we'll send the email for you. The second option is maybe you want to brand and include some logos in your email. You can grab the link off the session object and then send it over with whatever transactional mailer service you have, as long as the link gets to the user somehow. And the final step here is the authorization callback. So in our previous talk, we were setting up redirect URIs where users would be redirected to. We would take an authorization code, send it over to WorkOS, and we would receive a profile back. The really great thing about this step is it's the exact same endpoint as WorkOS SSO. So if you've already integrated with us for SSO, you've completed the final mile for integrating with Magic Link. You don't need to do any code changes. All you'll need to do is the previous 2 steps, and that's pretty much it. So let's take a look at what this looks like in a live demo with Memex. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, great. So here I have the login screen for Memex, and I'm going to log in with my user. And let's pretend we've done some UI work, and we've added a button that can send Magic Link. And on the right here, I have a controller that's wrapping this Magic Link. And my goal here is to take the email that's being sent over, generating the session, and then sending the Magic Link over. So if we go over the steps that we just saw in the slides, the first thing I want to do is create a passwordless session for the email that's being inputted. So this is a Magic Link session. and I'm going to pull the email off the form that I get. And then for the second step, we have two options. The first option is we can pull the magic link directly off the session object, and then you can send it however you'd like. But for the purposes of this demo, we're going to use the WorkOS API, and we're going to send the magic link directly over. So we'll use the passwordless API. And that's pretty much all there is to this. In 2 lines of code, we successfully integrated a passwordless authentication flow into Memex. So let's see what this looks like on the application. When I go, I can click Send Magic Link, and I'll get a notification that I've received an email. So I can come into my email, and I'll see that I get a sign-in link for Memex. And the other great part is if I come into my WorkOS dashboard, I have connection information about the magic link. So from a debugging perspective, you can see as sessions are created, as your tokens are expiring, or as they're being delivered to your users. So I can come into my email, go ahead, click Sign into Memex, and I'm immediately redirected back to the application. And if we come back to our WorkOS dashboard, refresh, we'll see that the most recent passwordless session has been verified. So in just a few minutes, and with 2 lines of code, we very easily have integrated a passwordless authentication flow into our application. And that's all there is to it. Okay, back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Rohan. So that is WorkOS Magic Link. This is the absolute easiest way to sign users into your application. It's totally universal. It doesn't matter what identity system they might be using or what email address they have. All you need to do is collect their email, send them that link, and they'll sign in. Your application never needs to store passwords. You don't need to figure out salting and hashing and bcrypt and all of that. And this is a seamless on-ramp to single sign-on. You're essentially already building half of the SSO experience. So if you have some users that want to upgrade to a SAML authentication or you want to add Okta, you're like halfway there already. And we're launching this as a free API. So we want everyone to be able to use this. You can get started with this as soon as you want. It's super, super fast to drop in. I think this will be really easy to, or really great to use for like hobby projects too, when you don't want to have to build, a full auth connector or store passwords in a database or salted hashed passwords. You can use this. So it's Magic Link, brand new today, and that's the 4th feature that we're chatting about. So this is all the stuff we have laid out for you today in terms of new features and functionality. There's a lot more stuff inside of WorkOS that we're not talking about today, including audit logs and a lot of other stuff. So we'll chat more about those in the future, but I'm really excited to overview this for you today. And really what these comprise are the building blocks for enterprise apps. That's what we're building at WorkOS, is all these different components that you need to actually bring together to roll your product out to enterprise users. We are ready for business, essentially. So WorkOS is built from the bottom up for enterprise-grade security and reliability, and also performance. And we've done a ton of work to really check all the boxes out of the box. So in addition to us helping you become enterprise-ready, we've done a lot of work ourselves to become an enterprise service provider, probably more than really any other startup I've heard of. We are SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, which is a pretty huge thing, especially given how complex that is to do. We're fully compliant, we're ready for enterprise environments, and this is being used in production today. So thousands of people are using, apps powered by WorkOS. Quite a large number of those people are already at Fortune 500 companies. So you're within great company as you look to roll your product out using WorkOS. This is already in production, it's already battle tested, ready to go. So the WorkOS, you can integrate it today. Shoot us a note, we'll get you started. You could ship it tomorrow and we'll scale with you for years. Really the thing here is you can avoid months of pain developing this in-house. You can get to market faster. You can go close those deals essentially now instead of waiting several quarters to build it. It's really, really fast to integrate with our SDKs. I think you'll find that we have a super, super smooth experience from a developer perspective. We've spent a tremendous amount of time just really focused on the developer documentation, the ergonomics around our SDKs, and just the overall developer experience integrating. We're able to provide really affordable pricing for all use cases. So whether you're, a brand new 3-person startup wanting to integrate this, or you're, say, a super large organization wanting to use this for internal tools or tens of thousands of users, it doesn't matter. We can scale our pricing up and down based on that. And at the end of the day, what we help you do is unlock that enterprise expansion, unlock that enterprise revenue if you're a startup, skip the line, become enterprise ready, and not have to build this in-house. So that's the majority of what we wanted to show you today around WorkOS products and features. Hope that you enjoyed that. I'm really glad y'all were able to attend. Huge shout out to our entire team for putting this together. There's been a lot of late nights and a lot of sweat putting demos together that can go as well as that. So thank you to the whole team for doing this, and thank you for you attending. And also, especially thank you to our users and developers for giving us such incredible feedback the past few months. We love hearing from you. If you have any thoughts on what we showed today, or ideas or suggestions, you can tweet at me or at WorkOS, chat with us there.